Hello and welcome back. This is Devlog 2 of my series of creating an indie game for Steam. Many survival horror games, such as Resident Evil, Amnesia, Dead Space, are known and praised for their really unique and often very good level design. But as you can all see in that last video, I mainly focused on the gameplay. This was really just because in the last games I've made, they haven't really been very good. They've been pretty ass, to be honest, and not really immersive. That was a really big issue I had with them. So that's why when I finished setting up the movement in this game, I immediately went to adding multiple different sort of gameplay systems, such as the inspect system. I also added a bunch of audio stuff like the player's footsteps noise, some ambient noises, so not really a lot of level design thought. But today, that all changes, because now I'm going to focus entirely on the level design of the map, mostly because I think it's needed and because the player at the moment is walking around aimlessly like Helen Keller trying to find a cask of milk. Okay, so I started off on Google looking for some images of some semi-open world maps. I already knew I didn't want the game to be in a massive area or literally like an open world area. This is just because games like Dead Space or Amnesia that I'm using as inspiration are often quite closed off or really small, and it really enforces that sense of like confinement and claustrophobia. I also didn't want the map to guide the player to where they need to go, as I really hate games that hold the player's hand. And I'm looking specifically at you, Final Fantasy 13. However, I ended up looking at the map from Amnesia the Bunker, as I thought it was pretty cool. I really liked the way it put the player in the middle of the map and gave them the freedom to explore anywhere they wanted. I also used the robot known as ChatGPT to give me some inspiration for possible map designs, and the results were more than interesting, I guess. Once that was all done, I started to create my own map in Photoshop, and I also added some rooms that fit the vibe of the industrial science research facility I had mentioned in the previous video. Look at that. I was pretty happy with how it looked. Obviously there'll be some slight changes to the map as development goes on, but this is the main layout of the map that I wanted. I then realised I didn't want the room that I had made in the last video to be the safe room that I've added in the middle of the map. I just didn't want it, okay? I can't think of a reason other than I just didn't want it to be there. So I started to think of other ways that I can have the player get to the safe room without having to guide them like a mindless stone. I'm still looking at you, Final Fantasy 13. I ended up having it so there'd be a few corridors that would lead up to the foyer, and then the player can get towards the safe room by going through the armory and then obviously to the safe room. So that's what I did. Here is me making some corridors and adding the lighting and all that lovely stuff. I also realised that this would be a great area for the player to get their first item, mainly because I'd already thought of what would be in the foyer, and I also realised that if the player was to find said item in the foyer, they'd probably just miss it or just become way too overwhelmed with the items in that room. So I started to make this very small locker room that had a light in it, so that when the player would turn, this is the first thing that they would check out. Now, you're probably wondering what the item I'm talking about is. It's a light.
You what?
Now, I wanted this light to be a bit different from the other traditional horror games, where the light source is constant and never ending. I wanted the items in my game to be useful, but also to have a downside to it, like certain armors in Elden Ring or something like that. This is mainly just because I want the player to not feel secure wherever they are, because this is a horror game after all.
Stupid.
So after looking at, again, Amnesia the Bunker, I really like the idea of a wound up light source. However, when I was playing the game, I really hated how the light was barely like functioning, and also how I was having to constantly wind it up like every 3 seconds. So what I'm going to do a bit differently in my game is that I'm still going to use that wind up function seen in Amnesia, but instead I'm going to have it so that the player doesn't have to wind it up so often and so it stays bright for longer. I also needed the flashlight itself to stay in line with the 80s futuristic tech vibe that I'm going for, and not whatever the hell this looked like in the Amnesia game. So fortunately I have a friend who's doing game design at university and who has also made a flashlight asset, and I asked him if I could use it and he said yes. I then remember that when I was a kid I had one of those flashlights that had to use a wind up handle in order to be used. So with this in mind, I went into Blender, did some fine tuning, and voila! So once that was all done, I put it into my Unity editor and it looked really nice in terms of the context of the world. I also modelled the room the flashlight was going to start in a similar style to how Amnesia the Bunker did it, mostly as like a little nod to the people who have played the game, but also because I thought it was a great way to lure the player into this important room. And just like that, week 3 was done. I was really happy with the progress I'd made, and yeah, on to week 4. Okay, so you know how I sort of said at the start of this video I was going to focus on the level design? I'm really sorry. I just got way too excited and started working on the flashlight handling. So yeah, sorry about that. I will get back to it as soon as possible. So once I had the flashlight object in my game, I needed it so that it could be picked up by the player. So working with my previous cursor script that made it so that when the player looked at certain objects, the cursor would expand, I did this same thing, but added it so that it also worked on the flashlight. Once that was done, I created a new script that made it so that when that object was clicked on, the object would hide, giving the impression that the player had picked it up. So once that was done, I added onto that script to make it so that when that object was hidden and the player presses the 2 key, the flashlight will show up. Now, I'm a big advocate for showing instead of telling when it comes to tutorials and games, and for this part it was important for the player to see exactly how the flashlight works. So with this in mind, I needed to animate the object in the game in a very short cutscene after the player has picked up the flashlight.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
For context, I have never in my life touched the Unity animation system, so I was going to have to learn it from scratch. But I found this tutorial by Ketra Games that was really useful in helping me understand the basics of animation within Unity, and it ended up being really simple, to be honest. You press record, you move the object, then you move the object again, stop recording, save, and it will do it all for you. So after doing the animation, I found out pretty quickly that I needed a different camera to play the animation for that cutscene, and not the main camera that the player was going to be moving around in. This just ended up having a lot of issues, one of them being the player's head bop wouldn't work. So I had to use another camera that was identical to the player camera and animate that one, as well as using another flashlight object. Once that was done, here's the flashlight tutorial cutscene. I also added little bits of text in between each of the cutscenes so the player could understand which keybind does what. And once that was done, when the player presses 2, the player can see the flashlight. Oh wait, there's no animation for actually toggling the flashlight. Give me 1 sec. And done! Now we have a toggling system for the flashlight, as well as some really cool sound effects that I got from freesound.com. So yeah. Okay, so to be honest, this took way longer than it should have. There was a ton of small issues, such as the animation not playing, or it repeating itself, or then playing for half the time of the animation and going away. It's just a pain, but basically I got it done. It was just some simple tweaks. So within that same week, sort of going into week 5, wait. No, we're not going into week 5 right now. This was literally just between Sunday or Monday of week 4 and the start of week 5. After I'd done that flashlight, I then realised I had totally strayed away from what this video was meant to showcase, this being the map. So within those 2 days I just started work on the foyer. So for the foyer, I wanted to look really abandoned and messy, as if a panic had happened before the player had started the game. I did this by really starting off looking at some other games such as Resident Evil 7, some images of some abandoned areas, some foyers, and once I had an idea of what I wanted it to add, I started designing the room. The room, much like the starting room, was a mixture of my own assets as well as some assets from Pizza Doggie's PSX Mega Pack, as well as some small assets from Sketchfab. There'll be stuff for like gas masks or the pin board, all that sort of stuff. All these assets have been linked in the description. So after that, this is what the room was looking like. I added some blood splatters into the game, which was literally a PNG using as a cutout. But that was just to add to the classic horror game aesthetic, but also as a way to subtly lead the player towards a room they need to go in, this being the armory. I know how at the start I said I hated that sort of stuff by like leading the player, but what I really meant is that I hate it when the game does it for the entirety of their game. Stuff like tutorials is fine, it really doesn't bother me at all. So at the end of week 4 and I guess the start of week 5, this is what the foyer level is looking like. I thought it looked great personally, and I really loved how it shows the player the panic that has happened before the start of the game. I also thought it did a really good job of building up that tension between the player and the eventual reveal of the monster. But I am just going to end the devlog there for now. I still have so much to show you, but I wanted to get another devlog out before the end of the year. Really sorry about that. But anyway, thank you for watching, and also Happy New Year. I'm so incredibly excited for you to see how the game ends up being. You can wishlist it on Steam now. This is my shameless plug. I also have a free demo arriving on itch in February, so look out for that on either my Discord or this channel. Speaking of Discord, I have a Discord channel where you can keep up to date with the game's development instead of these devlogs that will come out in more lengthy periods of time now, as in the new year I will be working on other projects outside of this game. But again, thank you for watching. Please make sure to check out the announcement trailer if you haven't, and yeah, see you later.